Dr. Miles Hassell is the medical director of the Integrative Medicine Program at Providence Cancer Center, and he's been in that position since 1996. Before that, he was an internist both in private practice and at Providence Sunset. He's a co-author of a super good cookbook and kind of a guide to life, Good Food, Good Medicine, and I would highly recommend you purchasing it. Am I supposed to do that? He was born in Seattle, but he grew up and attended medical college in Western Australia, and we're really glad that he came back to us. He's the recipient of numerous awards that have to do with his great teaching ability. He presents regularly at numerous academic conferences, focusing on dietary choices and their connection to better health. Just like today when he's going to talk to us about sugars, soy, and alcohol, and breast cancer. Dr. Miles Hassell.
Thank you. So we're going to be talking about these three topics, at least two of which are pretty controversial. And so we'll be hitting the highlights of the slides. And then after each of the segments, the sugar segment is going to be the biggest. And then after each of the three sections, we'll take maybe 5 questions from the audience, just so you can get any burning disagreement off your chest. And because whenever you're dealing, especially with controversial issues, it's important that we give it the time to look at the critical analysis and don't be afraid to disagree. And I think I have a pointer here. Hold on. Which will make some of my slides easier. Aha! So when you see the little pointer start up here and start to move around, it's because my attention deficit disorder has taken control. Because I'm not getting a reliable pointer. So maybe I'll just have to describe what I'm referring to. Maybe I just need to do it much more slowly. It's that ADHD again. Let me get some more coffee. So we're going to talk about so we're going to be talking about these three subjects: sugar, soy, and alcohol, and their relationship to breast cancer, both with regard to prevention and with regard to survival issues. I represent the Providence Cancer Center's Integrated Medicine Program, and that's our team there. And we provide responsible natural medicine at both the Westside Center, the Zidell Center at St. Vincent's, and the Bradley Stuyvesant Center at Providence, Portland. So first of all, I seem to have lost a slide here. We're just going to be talking about sugar and breast cancer, and it's going to be relatively complex in a sense, because I'm going to be asking you to believe an argument that isn't as straightforward as I would like it to be. So first of all, sugars and refined grains and insulin and cancer are all interrelated, and we're going to be talking about each of these concepts. And they're also related to heart disease and stroke and dementia and diabetes. So we're going to be looking at sugars and refined grains. We're going to be looking at excess weight at the waistline and being sedentary, and relate all that to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and each time be feeding back on what its significance is for somebody trying to prevent breast cancer or survival issues for breast cancer. And this is one way to look at it that sort of emphasizes the fact that these are interrelated issues. They're not a nice, simple, linear response. So you have at the top, you have central obesity. My little arrow isn't showing up, is it? Oh, okay. A cameo appearance only. I'm going really slowly now. Maybe too slowly. Oh well. And then over on the left, you see dietary sugars and starches. On the right, insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And the bottom, inactivity. And all that feeds in, you'll notice, with my neatly placed arrows, to cancer and heart disease and stroke and dementia. Remembering that everything I'm going to be saying about sugars and breast cancer could equally apply to sugars and dementia, sugars and heart disease. Somebody who eats more sugar is actually at 4 times risk of heart disease than somebody who doesn't eat much sugar, for example. A far stronger relationship than we have with dietary fat, for example. So we're going to be using this term insulin resistance a lot. So let's define it. So insulin resistance occurs when you have this association with a big waistline, high blood pressure, high blood sugars, low HDL, and high triglycerides And this, we call some combination of this a metabolic syndrome. It's essentially synonymous with insulin resistance. And you don't have to have all of these elements. So you don't have to have all 5 of those elements to have insulin resistance. If you have 2 or more, you better watch out. And what causes it appears is being overweight, but not everybody who has this is overweight. A diet high in easily metabolizable sugars and starches, which is going to be the focus of this talk, being sedentary, which is a key part of how to do something about this problem, and choosing your parents poorly. So when you have insulin resistance, your blood sugar is trying to rise because your body takes more insulin to let the sugar into cells. And then your insulin rises to compensate for this, and your sugars stay normal for years, 10, 15, 20 years maybe. And then as your pancreas just can't keep up with producing that much insulin, then you develop type 2 diabetes. But this is a problem that predates diabetes by 10, 20, and maybe more years. And you can demonstrate that in all kinds of ways, and it's quite significant to find it prior to developing diabetes. So we're going to be talking about the connection between this concept of insulin resistance and obesity and breast cancer. And we're going to be talking about those things that reduce insulin resistance. So as we talk about this is a problem, we're then going to go back and say this is what you do about the problem. And what you do about the problem, if you want to leave early, is you eat a Mediterranean-style diet, which includes good fat. You avoid sugars and refined grains. You be physically active every day. And you do something about your waist if you need to. So let's look at the waist issues to start with. And we have evidence that your risk of getting breast cancer is greater if your waist is large, and your outcomes from if you have breast cancer are worse if your waist is large. We can also show you that your risk of breast cancer and your outcomes are worse if your blood sugars are high or if your blood insulin levels are high, and we'll touch on some references for that. And the importance of this for this talk is to realize that dietary sugars and easily metabolizable starches are big drivers of this problem of waistline and insulin resistance. And we're going to be touching on that. So I really wish I had my little arrows at this point. In fact, I'm going to come out in the audience, and I'm going to point to the top 4 lines on each of the left and right graphs, because it's the top 4 lines that you need to be paying attention to. And I'm going to come out and point to them with my pointer, and I'll ask you all to look at one of the screens, probably this one over here. So on the left, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, on the left. What this is saying is your risk of metastases if you have breast cancer is higher the heavier you are. Over here, your risk of dying of a breast cancer-related cause is higher the heavier you are. And this is just demonstrating these are not trivial associations. And even better. And I won't have to do this very often, but I just thought that this particular association is so important that I wanted to come out here and point that out to you. Because these are associations that are arguably as important as anything else that we do in breast cancer work except for probably surgery. Dr. Alberti will be glad to know that I still think that surgeons are really kind of vital. So let's look at just the insulin resistance part of this. So we talked about the waistline and overweight and obesity part of this. The next part is this idea that insulin resistance all by itself, regardless of your waistline, is critical. And so if you have higher levels of blood glucose, your risk is much higher of developing breast cancer. If you have high insulin levels, another marker of insulin resistance, then your risk, even at early stage, is substantially higher of bad outcomes from your breast cancer. And you'll notice much of this data goes back to the 1990s. This is what I'm saying is not new stuff. And if you have higher glucose, and this is a particular study over 1,200 women with breast cancer, studied for 10 years, the higher the blood sugars at time of diagnosis, the higher the risks of metastases, local recurrence, and death. And we're going to have solutions for all this. If we just look at the diabetic subpopulation, all those things I already said are also correct. Then we're just going to look at the idea of studying women and how much sugars and easily metabolizable starches they eat. So by easily metabolizable starches, I'm talking about white rice, white flour primarily. That's like about 90 or 95% of it. In addition to, of course, sugars, which is sugar, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, agave syrup, and so on. And you'll see that women who eat more sugars have higher risk of getting breast cancer. If you have breast cancer and you eat more starches, you have higher recurrence rates. In this particular sample of 2,600 women studied for just 1 year, the recurrence rate was 14% in the women who ate a lot of starches and 9.7% in those who ate a little less starches. That's a big risk element right there. And one of the interesting associations, because with the whole lifestyle issues, the lifestyle issues seem to be more important for estrogen and progesterone receptor negative breast cancers, and this also applies to sugars. Sugars appear to be a greater risk factor for ER negative tumors than not. So what are we going to do about this? We want to find those things that reduce insulin resistance and are associated with better outcomes from breast cancer. So, for example, I could give you all kinds of pills that improve insulin resistance. I can't show evidence for most of them. I'll touch on a couple of examples. To the contrary, I can't show you that we can actually change your outcomes. I can bring down your blood sugar with insulin injections. I can't show you that that's going to improve your outcomes. In fact, we have evidence that may make them worse. So we're going to be talking about the Mediterranean diet that has good fat, not low fat, avoiding refined sugars, refined grains, and sweet drinks, daily exercise, and weight loss when appropriate while maintaining muscle mass. That requires exercise. And in the future, we'll be probably talking about things like metformin and pioglitazone, which are two insulin sensitizers, but we don't have that data in good enough shape yet. So when we talk about a Mediterranean diet, we're talking about eating a lot of vegetables, whole fruits, beans, and legumes, and minimally processed whole grains. And the minimally processed part of whole grains is really critical because probably the biggest sources of non-sugar starch in our society, or starches in our society, is going to be refined wheat flour and refined white rice. We include extra virgin olive oil and raw nuts and seeds as your main vegetable fats, but things like avocados and so on are good. We include unprocessed animal proteins, and emphasizing fish that's high in omega-3 fatty acids, oily fish, but including all other animal proteins, including cultured dairy foods. We're not so keen on milk, but that's kind of based on historical precedent. We don't have all that great a data to support us on that. But just humans historically have not drinking a lot of milk, but they have used cheese and yogurt and kefir. And then keeping alcohol to 1 glass of wine a day. And we're going to be talking about that in the third part of this. So why do we talk about the Mediterranean diet? It's overall associated with better health outcomes across almost every major health domain, including cancer. If we just look at the effect of Mediterranean diet on insulin resistance, so we've talked about weight, we've talked about insulin resistance, and we've talked about sugars, and 3 separate things that I'm asking you to blend together in your mind. If we look at the Mediterranean diet, it's the most effective way we've had in a purely dietary form of reducing insulin resistance and preventing diabetes. And this is a potentially helpful slide that demonstrates this. I'm going to come down in the audience again. I'm going to use the right-hand screen. And you can see that in this study where they compared the Mediterranean diet to the Atkins diet, high-protein diet, to a prudent low-fat diet, commonly prescribed medical diet. All 3 of these are responsible diets. You can see that in the insulin-resistant subgroups, in the right panel of each half of the slide, the best response for blood sugar and the best response for insulin levels was in those who are on the Mediterranean-style diet, not the low-protein diet. The high-protein diet, which is what most of us would have predicted, or the low-fat diet, which is what most doctors would have prescribed. If you get an implied criticism in that comment, you are correct. So what about the Mediterranean diet and breast cancer? So we've talked about Mediterranean diet and insulin resistance. And historically, it's been found that the Mediterranean diet is associated with lower incidence of breast cancer, and that's also been seen in North American populations to the degree that you can actually demonstrate a dose-response curve. In other words, the greater the adherence to Mediterranean diet principles, the lower a woman's risk of developing breast cancer. And so you can see that, for example, if you look at the people with high adherence to a Mediterranean diet compared to those with low adherence to a Mediterranean diet, then there's a 40% difference between those two groups. And if you're interested in sort of comparing Mediterranean diet to other dietary patterns that people talk about, this slide is there just to help you sort of see all the different areas, all the different domains in which the Mediterranean diet has been shown to be beneficial in both randomized controlled trials and in prospective observational trials. And you can compare it to whatever else you're thinking of following and sort of see, what would you bet your life on? That's the question to ask. Those are the references for it. So we've talked about the breast cancer risk and breast cancer outcomes, and they're associated with weight, with mainly indicated by waistline, with sugar intake, and with insulin resistance all by itself. And so now we're talking about what to do about it. We already talked about the Mediterranean diet and how it's been shown to reduce insulin resistance, and it's also been shown to be associated with lower rates risk of breast cancer. If we look at the next step is to get rid of refined carbs. As a subset of thinking about the Mediterranean diet, get rid of refined carbs, which includes juices and sweet drinks and refined flours and white rice. 1 serving of white rice a day is associated with 11% higher risk of diabetes. 2 servings, 20% higher risk. 3 servings, 33% higher risk. Why do people eat white rice? Buy your food unsweetened and sweeten it yourself. And if you really need a sweetener, add it at home and use small amounts of honey or maple syrup or regular sugar. Remember, your body knows what sugar is. It doesn't know what artificial and non-nutritive sweeteners are. And they actually cause an interesting derangement at the brain level. So your body actually doesn't know what it's eaten, and it wants to eat more. And that appears to be why people who eat more non-nutritive sweeteners tend to be heavier, have more diabetes, and more vascular events. By vascular events, we mean heart disease and stroke, which is good for business. So there's a trade-off there. So we talked about avoiding sugars. The next thing we're going to do is talk about avoiding refined grains. Remember, refined grains in Emmon's data from San Antonio a couple of years ago showed about a 30 or 40% increase. People who eat more of these refined grains had a 30 or 40% increase in their risk of developing breast cancer and breast cancer outcomes, recurrence rates. In heart disease data, people who eat more refined grains are about 3 times higher risk of developing heart disease and stroke. So this is a big deal. And you'll notice there's a huge list there. This is half the supermarket. It's a big deal. Read the list, apply it, and instead of eating those refined grains, which includes most of the breads, pastas, cereals, I consider breakfast cereal, just to show you how extreme I am, I consider breakfast cereal to be a form of child abuse. And I'm not exaggerating, I don't think. I think the data is strong enough. Plus, they're expensive. And instead, you can eat these whole grains like oat groats and whole unpearled barley, which is kind of hard to get, millet, quinoa, brown rice, all these different foods that are rich in nutrients and fibers, and associated with less breast cancer. So high-fiber foods in general are associated with lower breast cancer incidence. And you'll notice that beans and lentils, 2 servings a week, associated with a 24% lower risk of developing breast cancer, and higher survival, maybe as high as 50% higher, greater survival. And if you feed that back to our original argument, higher fiber foods are associated with less insulin resistance, better insulin resistance. Fruits and vegetables. We would argue that a fruit or vegetable, whole fruit or vegetable, not a juice, should be part of every meal and snack. And you can see in the breast cancer data that people who eat more vegetables and fruits have substantially better breast cancer survival. Once again, we're talking the 40 to 50% improvement range. It's actually much harder to show this with respect to incidence, because it looks like there's sort of a threshold effect. Unless you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, it doesn't actually show up as a protective factor in incidence, but it actually shows up quite well in terms of survival. And now we're going to talk about exercise and insulin resistance and breast cancer. And this is an 88-year-old patient of mine setting off on a 15K fun run. You can do this. He didn't start running until he was in his late 50s. He said the first run was about between 2 telephone poles, and he had to stop. So there he is. He's now 89 and still doing well. So he still runs 3 or 4 miles several days a week. or sort of walks. It's a fast walk. So exercise is associated with less incidence of breast cancer, better outcomes from breast cancer, less insulin resistance. It'll prevent just about everything on the planet. Not just your breast cancer problem outcomes, but also heart disease, stroke. And remember, most women with breast cancer don't die of breast cancer. Most women with breast cancer die of heart disease or stroke. And so everything we talk about shouldn't just apply to breast cancer. It should talk about overall health outcomes. I'm not going to go through all the details of what exercise will do for you. But if you're not planning 30 minutes or more of something like a walk every day, then I really don't think you're taking your health seriously enough. And don't see yourself as a victim. See yourself as a victor, somebody who can take control of these issues and throttle them and toss them in the corner and move on with your life. So the American Institute of Cancer Research, I'm pleased to say, also suggests at least 30 minutes and preferably 60 minutes a day of something such as brisk walking. And they also make another point that's important. Avoid sedentary activities such as watching TV. Because being sedentary is completely a separate risk factor from exercising. So let's pretend you go for a walk 30 minutes every day. Your risk is actually still high if the rest of the time you spend sitting. And so you need to not sit for more than an hour or two. When you're on the phone, get used to standing up and talking on the phone, walking around. Find a way to break up your life all the time. So in summary, sugars and refined grains are associated with numerous diseases, including insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, but also breast cancer incidence and breast cancer outcomes. To do something about it, you minimize sweets, sweet drinks, juices, and highly refined grains, which includes most breads and most pastas, and eat a Mediterranean-style diet with good fats and exercise every day. Now we're going to talk about soy, but we'll take five questions on sugars.
One of the things you had listed as something to avoid was granola. I make granola with like oatmeal, nuts, a little bit of honey. Why is that considered refined?
Granola is considered refined because it's addictive. And it has way more calories in it than people realize. And so we argue that people, and in fact in our book, we have a granola recipe that a lot of people like. The next edition of the book, it's going to be in a black box with a warning around it. That if you're overweight, don't use this stuff. And mueslis are better. That's question one. Yes, sir. I think he might be the only guy in the audience, so I've got to give him some time here.
I'm confused about sugar. You say avoid sugar. Apples have a lot of sugar in it. Is there a distinction between the types of sugar?
So the question is there a distinction between the types of sugar? No, there's a distinction between the delivery vehicle. So when you eat an apple, you're going to get 70 or 80 calories, which are mostly sugar, that are slowly metabolized, along with all this fiber. So because of all the fiber, you get this slower metabolism, and you just can't eat that many apples. Now, let's talk about it. And if you look at your blood sugar rise following eating an apple, it's very slow. Now, let's give you a glass of apple juice that has the equivalent sugar of maybe 6 apples. Could you eat 6 apples very easily? Most people couldn't. And so that's the difference. So it's a delivery vehicle which slows the insulin response, and then it's the sheer quantity. And apples are really good for you. Question over here. Well, we don't really have good data on stevia, but remember, all of the other non-nutritive sweeteners mess up your brain. And they tell the brain that you've eaten that you haven't eaten something when you have. And somehow the brain can't figure this out, and it goes out and wants to eat more. And there's really elegant studies, both in humans and rats. The rat studies are the most fun, where they don't know when to shut off. So that's issue number one. We don't trust it. Issue number two is we've got to do something about our sweet tooth. And the way you do something about your sweet tooth is you have less sweets. Thirdly, there aren't too many foods that somebody else has added stevia to that are good for you. Most commercial foods out there that have added artificial sweeteners or non-nutritive sweeteners, such as stevia, are usually garbage for some other reason. So they're a marker of bad food. Now, obviously, adding it to your coffee at home is not the same situation, but it does maintain your sweet tooth. And so if I were you, I wouldn't do it. 1, 2, I think we're up to 3 slides, 3 questions. white shirt. Most of the time, yeah. So when you see the word wheat, replace it with the word white, and you'll usually be correct. Because almost all wheat products are white flour products. It's very rare for them to be a true 100% whole wheat. So, no, if it says 100% whole wheat, you might be okay. But even so, if you're struggling with weight issues, I wouldn't even eat that. It's just too easy to eat, too many calories, too fast, because of the very, very fine nature of modern refined grain products. So I'm actually going to, there's two, at the end of your handout, there's two references that are free on our website that help address that. But if you only remember one thing, get rid of refined carbohydrates, including refined grains, even the whole wheat versions. If it doesn't come through into your kitchen in a whole grain form that looks like something just came out of a farmer's field, until you've got your weight in control, get rid of it. That means get rid of all. And one question from the center here.
I just had a question about the fruits and things that are high fiber that have some sugar in them. Does it slow it down to put like almond butter on the apple or a little bit of cheese on something if you're going to have it anyway?
So the question is, if you're going to have whole fruit, then should you add some fat to it to slow down the absorption of the sugar? That does work. And so we would argue that every meal and snack should be a fiber, a protein, and a fat. So if you're going to have an apple, have a few almonds or something like that. So I would agree with that concept. But whole fruit is so much better than fruit juice that we wouldn't get too excited. So now we're going to cover, those are 5 questions, so we'll hopefully finish in time to have a bunch of time for questions at the end as well. So now we're going to talk about soy. And so this slide is really, we're just going to talk about soy and breast cancer prevention. And then the next slide, we're talking about outcomes in women with breast cancer. So we have multiple studies, all of which suggest either a preventative effect of soy or a neutral effect of soy. What we can't find is evidence that soy hurts you. It's just another bean, or legume if you're a purist. And what was interesting in so I've got the first 2 bullets, just talk about the soy consumption, whether you're going to get breast cancer or not. And it says either no effect or protective effect. The third bullet refers to a German study where they looked at consumption of all kinds of foods and risk of breast cancer. And they found actually a better protective effect from sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds than they did from soy. And so this is important to remember. Soy is just another bean. It's nothing to get too excited about. The issue with soy historically has been it has a lot of these phytoestrogens, which are these weak estrogen analogs. So it acts like a really weak estrogen in your body. And that can either be an estrogen receptor exciter under some conditions, or an estrogen receptor blocker, because it keeps the more potent estrogens from attaching to that estrogen receptor. So remembering that it's not, if somebody says, well, but soy is just estrogen. It's not estrogen. It can actually act in either as an estrogen or an anti-estrogen, depending on the situation. And remember, your body is smarter than doctors. So this is the second slide. This relates to the research that we have available to us just on soy consumption in patients with breast cancer. And we see large populations where it either makes no difference to survival or a trend towards improvements in both breast cancer-related deaths and recurrence rates, or a significant benefit. In other words, we don't really know, but it looks like it's not real potent. And in any case, it does not appear to be harmful. So it's either neutral or beneficial. Once again, just not worth the attention that's given, in my opinion. It's just not important enough. But if anything, so certainly if you're my patient, I'm going to recommend you include soy foods, because I would argue that the burden the weight of evidence favors it being slightly protective. And in time, we may find it out that it's neutral. So if we're going to eat soy, it's probably reasonable to use moderate amounts of traditional soy foods. Nothing I'm saying suggests I'm suggesting that textured vegetable protein, which is nothing natural about that stuff, or any kind of soy extract. I'm not talking about any of those foods. I'm talking about the traditional foods, which are soybeans, including edamame, tofu, tempeh. And about half a cup of soft tofu has about 10 grams of soy protein, which is the amount that's been shown both in heart disease studies and in breast cancer studies. If you are looking for a dose kind of thing, that would be about the right dose. We would suggest avoiding highly processed soy foods and extracts, and that's because under some conditions, these foods can actually concentrate the estrogenic component and make them much more potent. And that's probably not a smart idea. And there's some products in the early 2000s that did that, and they had a suspicious association that we don't know if it's causal or not, but there's a suspicious association with more breast cancers in those products. And there's my comment that, remember, in the fourth bullet, there's no magic beans. Other beans and legumes have similar levels of anti-cancer data. For example, lentils. I think lentils are great. And finally, just in terms of thinking like an omnivore, remember that sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds have at least as good a data for preventing breast cancer as soy, and probably better. And they're also really good for heart disease. Oil seeds are sunflower, pumpkin, flax, and I'm missing something. Sesame are the main oil seeds in our society. We're big fans of flax seeds too. So whole soybeans, as well as other beans, legumes, and oil seeds are good food and overall are associated with a modest trend towards less breast cancer and probably improved outcomes. So we think soy is okay. So 5 questions about soy, if there are some. Mary.
The pumpkin seeds and the sunflowers have to be raw, or is it okay if they're roasted and salted and flavored and all those good things that you did?
Ooh, nice question from the shill in the audience. So Mary asked the very important question that if you tamari, soak, and roast and salt these seeds, are they just as good? The data I presented didn't actually break them out, but I would say that a person with a brain would say, when you heat these things and add a whole bunch of other fats and a bunch of other salts, they probably are nowhere near as good for you. Plus, when you roast and salt and flavor sunflower seeds, do you stop at a handful? So in terms of weight management, I would argue that you should eat all these things raw. Did I answer your question, Mary? Thank you. Anyone over there?
I've read that most soy in this country is GMO. Is that a concern?
That's not on my radar for concern. And if there's a Scientific American article from August of last year that's really worth reading. If GMO is on your radar, read the Scientific American article. So that wouldn't be on my, as far as a health issue goes, wouldn't be on my radar.
So like a lot of talks, even at Whole Foods, the new seasons, you see soy, chocolate chips. You're saying that's okay, or is that one of the ones that is?
Well, remember, I'm anti-processed foods. So if you showed me a box of cookies at New Seasons, I would probably give you 3 or 4 reasons why it's garbage. And I promise, I'm not intending to use that word for shock value. I'm serious. It'll have refined sugars, refined flours. It's just, if you're going to eat cookies, make them yourself or don't eat them.
No, but so many things, even at Whole Foods and those seasons, like I shouldn't use cookies, have soy.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I would buy that would have soy added as an ingredient.
Okay.
Can anybody think of some examples? Because maybe I can't think of an example. Soy milk. I'm not a big fan of soy milk. So when you make soy milk, you're keeping a very small component and you're throwing the rest away where it gets turned. Throw the rest away where it gets turned into animal feed or something. So the basic benefits of the soy food are gone. Remember, your soy is this whole food and soy milk is this liquid. You don't have to be real smart to say, wow, there's a lot missing here. And so we don't really have good data on soy milk. But my sense is humans have been drinking real milk. If you really want milk, drink the real stuff, in my opinion. But I can't really speak to data one way or another. I'm just an anti-processed food guy. So that my bias says, you know what? I don't think that this is a really smart food. Now, if your Chinese ancestors made soy milk, and you're making it that way, that's probably a pretty reasonable food, but they also use the leftovers for something else.
What about, we were talking about whole wheat, what about the issue of inflammation and gluten?
So the question is, if I may rephrase the question, tell me if I got this right, does eating whole wheat products increase inflammation in the body? Is that the question?
The whole gluten-free issue.
Yeah. So if you have celiac disease, you should be eating gluten-free, and that's, I don't know, 1 to 5% of the population, depending how you measure it. If you're intolerant of oranges or walnuts, you shouldn't be eating them. But so what I'm referring to is for those of us that don't have any individual intolerance. But to suggest that somebody who, just in the general population, shouldn't eat wheat because it causes inflammation, I think it's literally crazy. Show me the data. This is something that's very easy to measure. And so if you're going to look at all the anti-inflammatory diets, which one has been shown to be truly anti-inflammatory as measured? Mediterranean diet's the only one I know of. The only one I know of. Unless you include weight loss diets. And any weight loss diet is anti-inflammatory. I could put you on the Twinkie weight loss diet. And that's actually been done. This guy ate 800 calories of Twinkies a day. And he lost weight very effectively. Nobody, including him, is going to suggest that that's a good diet to follow. But so I cannot see any reason to restrict wheat, on any basis for those who don't have a wheat intolerance. Any more than I restrict walnuts for people, for everybody else, just because some people don't tolerate walnuts.
So I have a question about the different camps of diets, and one is ketogenic, which the brain apparently, and cancers can't use the ketones, but the brain can as energy. But also the Weston A. Price and then the forks over knives. Do you get tests to see how you tolerate particular things, to see whether you should go to this camp or just to eat a Mediterranean diet? Could you just address that one?
So I think the question is, tell me if I get this right. Looking at all the diets out there, is there a way you can test yourself to see if you should fall into one camp or another? And I don't know of one. So if you look at the Mediterranean diet, which is the most omnivorous of these diets, it has by far the best health outcomes, and nothing else is even close. It's really omnivorous, which is kind of nice for those of us that want to select what we want to eat. So restrictive diets don't make sense to me. Plus, what has the best health outcomes? And so within the Mediterranean diet, all of us are going to have preferences. I like walnuts. I don't like almonds as much, so I'm going to eat more walnuts. So there's plenty of variation you can do within the Mediterranean diet, but I'm not aware of any reason to go to a highly restrictive diet that has never been something that humans have naturally selected. So one of the concepts we use quite often is this concept of historical precedence. So if people have been doing something for hundreds of years, it's probably okay. And another concept is bodies are smarter than doctors. But if people haven't been doing ketogenic diets, you'd need, which is potentially a dangerous diet too if you mess up, you'd have to have a really good reason to do it. And so, for example, we would try it in a child with epilepsy because there's actually some fascinating data in that group. And so anything, there's exceptions to everything I'm saying, but not too many. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Epilepsy was and brain issues was one of the things I was looking at.
Yeah.
And asking the question.
Yeah. Let's take one more question on soy. Oh, none of these questions have been about soy, have they? Oh, well. Chia seeds, another good food. They're just another good food. Nothing magic. Not great, not bad, just another good food. Chia seeds is the question. Sure, it's good. All seeds are good. I think you've got a whole lot of Chinese and Japanese people to speak to about that if that's a critical issue. So the question is, should you eat fermented soy only? Is that sort of your question? Eat soy all the ways it's made. Tofu has been eaten for as long as humans have been recorded. And it's not fermented. Tempeh is fermented. So edamame is not. Doesn't matter, in my opinion. I've got two questions from our people in Bend. What is a moderate amount to consume daily? Is that a moderate amount of soy, I'm guessing? Maybe one serving of traditional soy food a day, like half a cup of tofu is the most commonly cited example. Nobody really knows, but that's a guess. And can you tell us about current research on sulforaphanes, I think is what they're referring to, which are a group of compounds in cabbage and things like that. I'm not aware of what the current research is doing there. There's a lot of work on cabbage and broccoli and kale and so on, all the brassica family foods, including by a group in Iowa. I love to cite them because they call themselves the broccoli bunch. And so we're guessing that cabbage will continue to be seen as an anti-cancer product. Now we're going to talk about alcohol. So first of all, let's just step back for a second and remember that alcohol is associated with lower all-cause deaths. So people who drink a small amount of alcohol are less likely to die young. It's associated with less heart disease and stroke. Almost all the benefit of alcohol is in the heart disease and stroke outcomes. It also lowers the risk of diabetes, kidney damage from diabetes. It lowers the risk of dementia and lowers the risk of depression, all in modest quantities. So we're not talking about alcohol in excess, which is the last bullet on this slide, which is when people use it excess, it's a horrible social toxin. It damages your health. It damages the health of everybody around you. It might damage the health of somebody who's had the misfortune of being on the road at the same time as you do. You personally may not be able to handle alcohol. And so what I'm about to say about alcohol needs to take all that stuff into account. If you can't handle it, ignore everything I'm about to say. When we talk about moderate alcohol, what are we talking about? We're talking about 5 ounces of wine, about 12 ounces of beer, and about 1 ounce of spirits. Different people will cite slightly different numbers, but pretty close to that. And for women, we're talking about 1 drink a day, and for men, we're talking about 2 drinks a day max. And the first part of this talk was really relating to insulin resistance. And so I'd like to point out in the bottom part of this slide, I'm going to come down in the audience again, right-hand screen. The bottom panel is for women. And you'll notice that moderate alcohol consumption, in terms of risk of developing diabetes, 1 drink a day is associated with a 24% lower risk of developing diabetes. There's very, very few factors that we have that can have that kind of impact. So alcohol lowers insulin resistance, and that's important in terms of what we're talking about overall. Now, if we're just going to now zero in on alcohol and breast cancer, at 1 drink a day, there's probably a slight uptick in breast cancer risk. And somewhere in the region of 5 to 11%, depending on how whose data you believe. And in epidemiologic terms, admittedly, 5 to 11% isn't a lot, but it's probably consistent. If you go over a couple of drinks a day for a woman, your risk goes up much more substantially in the 30 to 50% region. However, it doesn't seem to change your risk. So if you're a drinker and you get breast cancer, your risk of recurrence of being a drinker it does not change, and it does not change breast cancer-specific survival, nor does it affect your overall survival, as we'll talk about. Nor does it adversely affect the overall survival, as we'll look at in the next slide. For excess is more important if you've been drinking excess recently, as against when you're in college. Excess is more important if you're postmenopausal, and the cancers associated with excess alcohol are estrogen receptor positive as a general rule. Looking at the overall data, women who drink, who have a high folic acid content in their diet, high folate, so this is food source folate, right? Not little pills of folic acid. From egg yolks, from beans, from grains, from asparagus. Chickpeas are a really rich source. This is a good sales pitch for hummus. That seem to have the alcohol has less impact on their risk of breast cancer. And red wine, in some studies, has actually been shown to be protective. So red wine may be a whole different story here. But several studies have pointed out the aromatase inhibition effect of red wine, various antioxidant components in the flavonoid families. And also there's really interesting data that women who are undergoing radiation therapy, they seem to get less skin injury when they have red wine. So now let's look at women who have breast cancer. So So we've talked about how the fact that alcohol improves survival overall of women. So you just take 100,000 women, and half of them drink, half of them don't. You're going to have more people alive at 80 years old if they drink than if they don't. But you're going to have a little bit more breast cancer in that group and a whole lot less heart attacks and strokes, which is why there's a survival benefit. Now let's look at women with breast cancer. So these are 23,000 women who had invasive breast cancer and followed for an average of 11 years. Those who drank before their diagnosis had a significantly improved, not a huge, but 15%, which was statistically significant, improved breast cancer-specific survival if they drank. It didn't seem to matter what they drank. If you looked at the group overall who drank, their overall survival was dramatically better, 36% lower all-cause mortality in those who drank compared to those who did not. And this is so Wendy DeMarc-Winifred and Pam Goodwin Wendy DeMarc-Winifred, I think she's in San Diego, and Pam Goodwin in Toronto. These are two of the giants of lifestyle and breast cancer historically. These are two of the most credible authorities on the planet with respect to lifestyle issues and breast cancer. And this is what they say. Based on the best available evidence, it appears that the modest alcohol consumption after breast cancer diagnosis, up to approximately 1 drink a day on average, may be associated with optimal overall survival without compromising breast cancer-specific survival. Because remember, we need to be worried more about optimal survival, overall survival, than any disease-specific survival. Disease-specific survival is important, but what's even more important is whether you're... So if I give you a treatment that cures a cancer and kills you a year later, that's an extreme example for the purpose of illustration. We really want to prevent heart disease and stroke in women with cancer as well. So, if we're going to summarize the issues on alcohol and breast cancer, 1 drink a day probably increases the risk a little bit, but it lowers your risk of heart attack and stroke. If you get breast cancer and you're a drinker, it doesn't seem to, if anything, it might actually improve your breast cancer-specific outcomes. If you have breast cancer, your overall survival is much better if you're a drinker. For many people, it improves their quality of life. For others, it damages their quality of life and everybody around them. And so that can't be overstated, in my opinion. Using moderation, choosing red wine. In our practice, it's very, very unusual for a woman to be an excessive drinker of red wine. Our women alcoholics almost always drink spirits or white wine. I talked to one white wine excessive drinker the other day, and she said, well, of course, I don't like red wine. I said, well, that gives you your answer. If you increase the folate consumption in your diet, which is beans, grains, asparagus, other green leafy vegetables, chickpeas, egg yolks, then the risk may be minimized. And we're extremely unlikely to ever see randomized controlled trials of these concepts. So we're stuck with observational data because people won't randomize to randomized controlled trials for alcohol, and the people that would like to do the studies are inhibited because of the whole public health issues, which are very real. So, get rid of sugars and refined grains, and the other issues we talked about with respect to insulin resistance. Soy foods are probably refined to eat as part of a whole food diet, and alcohol is reasonable to include, but limit it. And now I think we've got, here's just a couple of slides. There's my personal website, and it has a couple of handouts that some cancer patients find helpful. The first one is a survivorship handout, and the second one is looking at the whole issue of reversing insulin resistance. And it has 21 steps that you can follow. And then this is the book that my sister and I wrote that's in second edition, and some people find it helpful for selecting good lifestyle practices. Any more questions? Oop. All right, so 2 questions. One from Roseburg. Can you elaborate more about genetically modified organisms? And really, no. It's not on the health. It's a socio-political issue, in my opinion, not a health issue. And so I refer people back to, I'm pretty sure it's the August Scientific American. I apologize for not remembering for sure. It's either August or September. Really nice overview of GMO or genetically modified organism foods. if that's an issue for you. Obviously, it's not for me. If fat is removed artificially from the waist, are your risks lowered? So basically, if you go and get liposuction, are you any better off? And the answer appears to be no. And the reason is the fat that is causing the trouble seems to be the fat that's in the liver, wrapped around the heart, wrapped around your colon and intestines and your pancreas and your spleen, and it's all over there. And you can demonstrate this in a CT scan. It's not the stuff that's under your skin, the subcutaneous fat. In fact, this has been studied in sumo wrestlers who have enormous amounts of subcutaneous fat, and they do just fine. It's the visceral fat, the stuff that's deep inside, that causes all the metabolic disruption for reasons that are not entirely clear. So she'd like a discourse on inflammation, which I neither have the expertise nor do we have the time. So inflammation is your body's healing response. And I apologize for shocking many of you. But you don't heal without inflammation. So the issue isn't that inflammation is bad for you. It's the fact that your body needs to heal so that inflammation can stop. So there's a number of issues around this, and that they revolve around how do you define inflammation and things like that. So obviously, if you cut yourself and some redness develops and it heals and you get a scab and the scab falls off and heals and the redness goes down, that's inflammation doing the right thing. When Dr. Alberti cuts you open and takes something out, inflammatory responses allow that to heal. And then there's the chronic inflammation that causes calcium to build up where it shouldn't and all that kind of stuff. And that would be classically inside arteries, for example. And that kind of inflammation we actually understand fairly poorly. But we do know that diets that are associated with less inflammatory markers, such as lower CRP, are associated with better health outcomes. And that's, you may be shocked at hearing this, the Mediterranean diet. And any weight loss diet. But you can lose weight loss in ways that everybody can agree on are really unhealthy and have your inflammatory markers fall. And we're pretty sure that's not a good sign. We're pretty sure it's independent of any benefit. So inflammation is an extremely complex area. There's entire tomes written about it, and I'm certainly not qualified to answer your question in any more detail than I just did. I apologize. In the way back. A glass of red wine has about as much calories, most of which are actually in the ethanol component, technically not a sugar, but close, as an apple. So the argument's the same. 70 calories from an apple or a glass of red wine is not your problem if you've got a sugar problem. And remember that we have consistent data that shows that the glass of red wine or any single serving of any alcohol reduces insulin resistance. So remember, I'm not against added sugar. I'm not against sugar. Maybe this needs to be clarified. I'm not against sugar. I'm against added sugars and refined sugars. So if you eat a piece of cabbage, you're getting sugar. Is that my concern? No. Somebody over here, way back. Oh. So the question is, thank you. So my other career is speaking on chocolate. So dark chocolate is associated with quite dramatic improvements in heart disease and stroke outcomes, probably dementia. So if you've got a little bit of a memory problem, you're not quite bad enough to call it dementia, but it's we call mild cognitive impairment. And we give you a cup of hot chocolate, your brain works better. You can solve puzzles better, you forget less, and that kind of stuff. So chocolate's good for you. It reduces risk of diabetes substantially. We would recommend that your chocolate be greater than 70% cocoa, or even better, greater than 85% cocoa. So if you really care about this kind of stuff, know what you're eating. A Hershey's bar just doesn't cut it. So we would go for 70, 80%. In our office, pretty much there's nothing except 88% endangered species right now. And for people who don't like that super dark chocolate, which is a little on the bitter side, then we recommend they have it with a piece of, say, an apple or something like that. And so going back to the lady's question earlier, if you have some dark chocolate and an apple, it actually slows down the rate of absorption of the sugar from the apple. So it fits into our fiber, protein, fat combination as being optimal for snacks and meals. Did I answer your question? Did I answer? Okay.
You were talking about white rice, but Asian cultures traditionally have very long-lived, very healthy people and eat a lot of white rice every day. What's the balance?
Their outcomes actually aren't as good as the Mediterraneans. And a lot of the data we've got are from people who are much thinner than Americans. So if you're a thin Japanese, you're probably going to do better than a chubby American and chubby sedentary American at the same level of white rice consumption. And remember that you can break any of the rules I've talked about, and if your genetics and other aspects of your life are right, you'll do just fine. So I have a 95-year-old. I see her once a week. She comes over to my house once a week, and she's done nothing that we're talking about here. She's round as a beach ball, sharp as a tack, still drives, and she's just a living example. I have another patient who comes in. She's pushing 90. She's 80 or 89, smokes half pack per day, 3 glasses of white wine a day. She, a few years ago, had a crush injury to her both legs. Bounced back from that, walks just fine, lives independently, and breaks all the rules. So is that the way that makes any sense to bet? No. Am I delighted that she's been able to break all the rules and survive beautifully? Yeah. But it's not the way I'd bet. Yeah.
So, you keep talking Mediterranean, so there's all kinds of stuff about paleo. How about, where do you sit there?
So the Mediterranean diet, remember, is not extreme. It's an omnivorous diet. Paleo is highly restrictive. And we don't think humans ever wanted a highly restrictive diet. Humans have always eaten everything they could get their paws on. Paleo studies are short, small, with soft results at best. These Mediterranean diet studies I have that show lower death rates, less heart disease and stroke, improvements in heart disease risk factors, less type 2 diabetes, better blood sugar control, sustainable weight loss, less cancer and less cancer deaths, improved brain function. And we should add reduced risk of peripheral artery disease. Oh, it is there. No other diet has that kind of complex of benefits. And I like to be non-restrictive. I'm a libertarian. I want people to eat as many foods as they can. Why would I present a highly restrictive diet to people when they don't need it? So, I mean, be paleo if you want, but why?
Could you comment on organic versus non-organic in your grains and your vegetables? And I'm particularly interested in what the organic beer makes.
As far as we can tell, it doesn't make a difference. We've got 30 or 40 years of data looking at this. And if you ever want to email me, I can send you the most recent reference, or you can get it in PubMed. So I take care of a wide range of patients. Am I going to ask a single working mother of 4 to go find some organic foods that she maybe can't afford unless I have good evidence for it? And we have 30 or 40 years of data that says, you know what, of all the things to worry about, this isn't it. So I'd prefer to see somebody feed their kids any broccoli than no broccoli. And I see an awful lot of my patients that are really keen on, I'm going to avoid GMO foods, everything's got to be organic, who are living on refined, or who are saying, I'm not going to eat gluten, who are living on refined starch products. And we see this very, very commonly in our practice. I'm going to take three questions from our little cards here. Cancer cells were destroyed, normal cells were not. What is your opinion on vitamin C? This is a little off topic. Let's have a quick show of hands. How many people want me to answer it? Ooh, not very many. Sorry, folks. I have a whole talk on vitamin C and cancer if anybody wants it, but we got very, very little pickup on that. It's off topic. We're going to have to move on. How long do I have? 5, okay. please talk about breast density studies and flavonoids reversal. All we can say is, this is a question from Medford, all I can speak to, this is not my area of expertise, is that you get better, lower risk breast cancer density on mammographically in women who have more flavonoids, especially red wine flavonoids in their diet. What was funny about that? Oh, okay. And the third question is, how important is buying organic? And I hope I've already addressed that. So the question is, if you identify a problem in a food, does that make the food a problem? So there's something called the Ames test. I promise I am really addressing your question. It doesn't seem like it for a second. The Ames test is a test, Bruce Ames down at Berkeley came up with this to identify carcinogenicity of a food or product or a chemical. And using the Ames test, and Bruce Ames is the first person, incidentally, who says, this is a horrible test. That's why I never patented it. It's out in the public domain. He never made a cent off this thing, and it's one of the standard tests used by the FDA for this kind of thing. And Bruce Ames says, it's totally inappropriate. And the reason he says it's totally inappropriate is there's not a food on the planet hardly that you can't prove is bad for you. Coffee, cabbage. Cabbage, you can always demonstrate cabbage is carcinogen. And yet, oddly enough, in people who eat cabbage, they seem to get less cancers. So what you have to do is divide population data and diet data and look at that as separate from hypothesis generating data, which is where people take a single chemical from a single food and say it does this. If that isn't reflected in the real world data, you have to ignore it until we get smarter. And so, for example, I can show you that caffeine is a real toxin, cardiotoxin, and yet people who eat coffee and tea have about a 10 or 15% lower rates of death. The theobromine in chocolate, bad stuff. But people who eat chocolate have lower death rates. And people who eat kale, how many people here eat kale? Ah! So the question is, are all of you guys being really dopey? I don't think so. Brassica family foods are really good for you. So I'd say, the studies that are being done of this nature are really good for hypothesis generation, but that's all they're good for. They require assessment in the real world populations. And that the same applies to phytates in whole grains. Phytates, we've always known that phytates do all kinds of bad things to your digestion, and yet you can actually go and buy phytates in the health food store under a different name as a cancer fighting compound. And it just tells you how little we know about food when we try to break it down. You can't be too reductionist. We're not smart enough yet. So the question is it responsible to suggest to somebody who is a teetotaler to start drinking? And all of the public health authorities would say no. Under no conditions should you ever advise somebody to start drinking. There's a study done of people in their 40s who didn't drink. And they studied those who began drinking after that time, and 1 out of 200 became an alcoholic. So some do, but it's pretty rare. So my thinking is we present the data and let it go from there. Let them make a reasonable decision. I've got a card here. This is a sneaky one. This is a sneaky one. Does the Mediterranean diet include pasta and French bread? Whoever asked this, it doesn't say where it came from, but there's somebody smiling out there just waiting. And the answer is yes. But remember, the data I'm taking is from two families of studies. The first family of studies is randomized controlled trials, where they actually push vegetables, olive oil, and actually ask people to eat a little bit less of this stuff. Baked goods are de-emphasized. The second group of studies that we're quoting data from are observational population studies, and where they're eating a lot more vegetables in proportion to their pasta than we do typically in the United States, and do a lot more cooking at home, which actually may be a huge factor. So the PREDIMED, which is one of the biggest groups that study this stuff, the PREDIMED group specified to their patients, if you're going to be in our study, here's what we're expecting you to make at home. So the home cooking part may actually be a much bigger factor than we appreciate. And there's all kinds of aspects to that. So yes, the Mediterranean diet does include pasta and French bread, but I would suggest that if you're a prudent person, concerned about cancer and concerned about your waistline, you will minimize those. If you are a thin, healthy person and eating tons of vegetables, whole grains, good animal proteins, good fats, and a little bit of red wine, you probably have more flexibility in this area. You have to find something that's going to work for you based on your individual risk factors, in my humble opinion.